The black folder under my arm contained the speech that was supposed to make my husband sound generous. I found him with his mouth on Brooke Carter's before I reached the ballroom. They were in the service corridor beside a cart stacked with coffee cups. Brooke had one hand against Evan's chest and the other on the old draft I'd printed for rehearsal. He was saying something against her hair. "After tonight," he said. "I told you." My heel caught the lower rail of the cart. 6 cups rattled. One tipped onto its side and rolled in a small white circle. Evan pulled away from her. "Dana." Brooke looked at me, then at the folder. She didn't ask what I had seen. Her lipstick was smudged at one corner. "You said you were telling her after tonight," she said. The ballroom doors opened behind me, releasing a burst of applause for someone I couldn't see. Evan took one step toward me. "Not here." I had spent 3 weeks finding the right opening for his acceptance speech. At 43, after 16 years of marriage, it turned out I had no opening for this. I walked past him. A young woman at the registration table smiled until she found my name on her tablet. "Dana Mills. You're at table 18 with the Lakeshore Group." "No," I said. My voice came out thin. "I'm Evan Mills's spouse." She checked again. Her thumb moved twice across the screen. "I do have you at 18. Mr. Mills's head table guest is Brooke Carter." Through the open doors, I could see Brooke's name printed on a cream card beside Evan's. Her wine had already been poured. Mine had not. Evan came up behind me and touched my elbow. I jerked hard enough that the folder edge hit the registration table. "Brooke needs to be beside me for the photographs," he said. "It's a company event." "And the kissing?" The woman with the tablet stared at a bowl of blank name badges. "Please," Evan said. "We'll talk at home." An MC's voice came through the speakers. "And in just 90 seconds, we'll welcome this year's Regional Business Leadership recipient, Mr. Evan Mills of Lakeshore Freight Systems." Evan held out his hand. "Give me the black folder. We can talk at home." That hand had been on Brooke's waist less than 2 minutes earlier. I watched it wait for work I had done after dinner, before breakfast, and through 2 Sundays when he'd said the award mattered to both of us. My fingers were shaking so badly that the metal clasp clicked against my wedding ring. I put the folder back into my bag. "You chose who sits beside you," I said. "Let her finish the speech." Then I walked out with my coat still hanging in the ballroom coatroom. I made it to the parking garage before I realized I didn't have my keys in my hand. I searched the side pocket of my purse, then the zippered pocket, then the side pocket again. They were in my other hand. My phone buzzed twice. "Evan, come back inside." "Evan, don't make this worse than it is." I sat in the driver's seat without starting the car. The hotel live stream was still open from when I tested the link for Evan's parents. I pressed play because I wanted to know what happened without me, then hated myself for wanting to know. Evan was already at the podium. He had the blue index card I'd made for rehearsal, the one with only the opening facts and the sponsor names. The final speech in my bag included a story about his father delivering appliance parts in a rusted international truck. It connected that story to Lakeshore's first warehouse and ended with Evan thanking the night shift crews by name. Without it, he thanked the hotel twice. He called the chair of the business council, Mr. Benson, when her name was Linda Benton. She corrected him from her seat, smiling because that was what people at awards dinners did. He tried to tell the truck story anyway. My dad used to say you learn a lot about a man by how he handles a bad transmission, Evan began. That was not what his father used to say. His father had told me, during a 2-hour interview at our kitchen table, that a bad transmission taught you which customers would wait and which ones would find somebody else. Evan lost the point halfway through. He looked toward the head table. Brooke leaned forward and mouthed something I couldn't read. There was polite laughter at the wrong place. I shut off the stream. My old friend Renee texted before I backed out. Renee, that didn't sound like you. Then another message appeared. Renee, or like him when you're helping him. I typed, I caught him kissing Brooke. I erased it. I typed, I left. I erased that too. Finally I sent, can you get my coat? She replied, yes. No question mark. No demand for details. I drove home in a sleeveless navy dress while the temperature dropped toward 38. The heater took too long to warm up. At a red light, I noticed a pale line across my ring finger where I'd twisted my wedding band around and around without taking it off. Evan and I lived in a 2-story house outside Grand Rapids that looked larger in listing photos than it felt with 2 people avoiding each other. We had bought it 9 years earlier, after Lakeshore promoted him from regional operations director to vice president. He had wanted a home office with a door. I had wanted one too. His office faced the backyard. Mine was the narrow room beside the laundry closet, where the dryer made my desk tremble during video calls. That arrangement had once seemed temporary. I went upstairs and reached behind my dress for the zipper. The pull caught halfway down. I tugged harder, twisted, and heard 2 teeth separate. When I finally stepped out of the dress, the back seam had split 3 inches. I left it on the bathroom floor. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle and forgot to turn it on. I stood waiting for water that stayed cold until the furnace clicked off and I heard how quiet the house was. My laptop was on the dining table. The folder in my purse seemed heavier than a 6-page speech and a handful of interview notes should have been. I opened the file history for Evan's award nomination. The first document had been created on my laptop 11 months earlier, E_mills_leadership_notes. Under that were 6 interview transcripts, 4 drafts, and a recording of Evan's father coughing while I moved a bowl of almonds away from the microphone. The Business Council's application had asked for a story showing long-term commitment to the region. Evan had stared at the question for 10 minutes, then slid the laptop toward me. You know how to make this stuff sound human, he'd said. I had called his father the next day. The story that resulted was good. I could admit that even while sitting barefoot at my dining table with mascara dried under one eye. It wasn't good because I had invented a noble childhood for Evan. It was good because his father remembered details Evan had stopped noticing, the thermos that leaked coffee into the truck's cup holder, the customer who waited 3 extra days for a compressor, the first employee who stayed through a winter when payroll came late. In the submitted PDF, those details remained. The document properties listed Brooke Carter as author. I stared at that line until my eyes blurred. Brooke hadn't worked at Lakeshore when I conducted the interviews. I opened a blank spreadsheet and titled the first column date. Then project. Then requested by. Then delivered TO. The first row was the award nomination. The second was Evan's keynote for the West Michigan Supply Council. The third was a customer letter after a warehouse roof collapse. I found the email in which Evan had written, "Can you smooth this out before breakfast? Brooke wants to send it at 8. There were more. The first one had not felt like work. 10 years earlier, Evan had been scheduled to welcome 40 employees at a holiday lunch in a bowling alley banquet room. He'd called me from the parking lot because the index card in his pocket said only thank everyone and don't forget Marcus retiring. I had been on deadline at the newspaper, but I drove over with a pen between my teeth and rewrote his welcome beside a rack of rented shoes. He'd made people laugh. Marcus had cried when Evan mentioned the winter routes he had covered without complaint. On the way home, Evan kept one hand on my knee and said, "You saved me." I had liked saving him. After that came a customer breakfast, then a safety luncheon, then his first board presentation. Sometimes he brought me a draft. More often he brought me a problem and an hour. He paced while I asked questions. He remembered better details when he wasn't trying to sound important. When the newspaper cut my position 6 years later, Evan said freelancing would give me room to find the kind of writing I actually wanted to do. I believed him. I took editing jobs, wrote profiles for 2 regional magazines, and filled the empty weeks with lakeshore work because there was always something urgent. None of it looked large by itself. 30 minutes before dinner. A Sunday afternoon. One last paragraph before bed. Brooke had joined Lakeshore 18 months earlier. The first time she emailed me, she asked for existing executive voice assets, which turned out to mean every speech I'd written since 2019. I sent them to Evan, and he forwarded them to her. A week later, she thanked him during a video call for building such a consistent leadership voice. He had winked at me from across the kitchen. I remembered smiling. Now I searched my inbox for her name. There were 38 requests, most forwarded by Evan with a sentence added at the top. "Can you take a look?" She had never asked whether I charged. I had never told her. I added a column to the spreadsheet, public credit. The first 12 cells were blank. I made it to 12 before I closed the laptop. The garage door rose at 11:46. Evan came in carrying my coat over one arm. Renee must have handed it to him before she left. He draped it over a kitchen chair as if he'd done me a favor. "What the hell was that?" he asked. His tie was loose. A small gold pin from the award ceremony sat crooked on his lapel. I looked at the coat instead of him. "Did Renee talk to you?" "She said you asked her to get it." "That's it." "Good." "Dana, I had 300 people in that room." I counted one in the hallway. He rubbed his face. "I am not doing this in riddles." "How long?" "Nothing happened the way you think it did." "I saw her tongue in your mouth, Evan." "Give me the version that happened another way." He glanced toward the windows, though the blinds were closed. "Tonight was a mistake." "How long?" "We got too close." "How long?" He opened the refrigerator, looked inside, and shut it without taking anything. "About 6 months." Brooke had said, "You promised after tonight." That wasn't the language of one mistake. I waited. 7, he said. Maybe 7. The fluorescent light over the sink made him look tired, not guilty. That bothered me more than it should have. Was it before her promotion? His jaw tightened. Her promotion was earned. That's not an answer. Because it's not relevant to us. I laughed once, and the sound came out wrong. She was sitting in my place beside you, Evan. It was the recipient guest seat. The seating changed. You know what I mean. I changed the seating because the photographer needed Brooke at the head table. Sponsors, board members, company people, that was the point of the table. You would have been with Renee and people you know. At table 18. It wasn't the parking lot. He always corrected the smallest fact when the larger one made him uncomfortable. During arguments about his travel, he reminded me that Detroit was 2 hours and 20 minutes away, not 2.5. When he missed our anniversary dinner, he said the flight had been delayed, not canceled. I pulled the broken zipper of my dress from the pocket of my robe and set it on the table. I didn't know why. It was just something hard to press my thumb against. Why did you still ask for the speech? I said. Because I was going on stage. After I saw you with her. The award had nothing to do with our marriage. The speech did. I wrote it. You helped with it. I interviewed your father. I wrote every line of those 6 pages. You didn't read the final version. You always do the final pass. That's our system. Our system. He pulled out a chair but didn't sit. You know I'm bad at that kind of thing. You're good at it. And tonight mattered. The refrigerator compressor started. Somewhere upstairs, the dryer gave one last unbalanced thump. I'd left wet towels inside all evening. Evan picked up his award pin and straightened it. Brooke and I have been under a lot of pressure, he said. The warehouse consolidation, the board review. Stop. I'm trying to explain. You're giving me her job description. He stopped trying to straighten the pin. I could see he was angry I wasn't making the conversation easier for him. What do you want me to do tonight? He asked. I honestly didn't know. Throw him out? Call a lawyer at midnight? Take off my ring and deliver a line worth remembering? Every option felt like something a steadier woman would do. Sleep in the guest room, I said. Dana. I need the bedroom door to lock. He stood there another moment, then took his suit jacket upstairs. I forgot the towels until the smell of damp cotton reached the hallway. I restarted the dryer at 12:31 and sat on the laundry room floor while it turned. At 1:17, my phone lit up with an email from Brooke. Subject, State Forum Keynote Files, Urgent. Dana. Please upload the latest Keynote draft and your supporting notes to the Lakeshore Communications folder tonight. We need to move into final review tomorrow morning. Please confirm once complete. She had copied Evan. I read the message twice. The State Forum was 12 days away. Evan had asked me to start gathering thoughts for it over dinner the previous Sunday. I had outlined 3 sections and interviewed the warehouse safety director, but there was no finished draft. Nothing had been delivered. I wrote back. All previously delivered Lakeshore materials remain in their existing company folders. The State Forum draft was not completed or delivered. I will not be continuing that assignment. I almost added, please direct future requests through Evan. Then I remembered that was exactly what she was doing. I sent the email without another sentence. At 7:08 the next morning, I found a 4-page contract on the kitchen table. A yellow note was stuck to the top. $2,000. 48 hours. Let's keep personal and professional separate. Evan had already signed his name. I made coffee before I read the contract. That was a mistake. By page 2, I had spilled a brown half-moon across the section called Ownership of Work Product. The agreement offered me $2,000 to complete the State Forum keynote within 48 hours. All drafts, notes, interview recordings, executive voice frameworks, and revisions would belong to Lakeshore. Brooke would have final approval. I could not disclose that I had participated. Evan was in his office with the door open, already dressed for work. "You left this on the table," I said. I thought it was better to make the arrangement formal. After 10 years. He kept typing. "We're not going to agree about the past this morning." I sat in the chair across from his desk. The contract had been generated from a standard company template. Someone had changed the fee, deadline, and project name. Brooke's name appeared in 3 places. $2,000 was more than I had earned the previous month. One of my magazine clients had folded in March, and another had reduced its freelance budget. I had $6,800 in my personal savings account and no signed work after Friday. I uncapped the pen attached to the folder. Evan stopped typing. "Thank you," he said, too quickly. "I know this is ugly, but the forum has nothing to do with." I reread the confidentiality paragraph. It didn't merely protect company information. It prohibited me from identifying myself as a contributor to any Lakeshore executive material, past or future. Did Brooke write this? Legal had the template. Did she choose the terms? She needs to manage the project. I put the cap back on the pen. Hire a writer who can put their own name on the invoice. He leaned back. "It's a ghostwriting job, Dana. Ghostwriters don't get a byline. They get hired before the work is done. And they know they're ghostwriters. So this is about the amount?" "No." "Then tell me what number makes it professional." I stood because sitting there made me feel as if I were being interviewed for a position I'd already held. "There isn't one." "That's not reasonable. You put the woman you're sleeping with in charge of approving my words. I'm allowed to be unreasonable before 8 in the morning." He looked toward the hallway. There was nobody else in the house, but lowering my voice had been one of our habits. "You are tying a company commitment to a private issue," he said. "You tied them together at the head table." The line sounded better than I felt. I dropped the coffee-stained contract on his desk and walked out before he could answer. At 10, I called a family law attorney named Elise Park. Renee had found her through a cousin, which did not inspire confidence until Elise interrupted my third attempt to explain the speech. "I understand why it matters emotionally," she said. "I need to know what exists on company equipment and what exists on yours." That question helped. I told her which folders were shared, which interviews I'd recorded at home, and which drafts had been delivered. She advised me not to delete, alter, or publicize anything. She also warned me against assuming 10 years of informal help created a simple wage claim. "Marriage is full of uncompensated work," she said. "That doesn't mean the work has no value. It means the remedy isn't an invoice we invent after the marriage breaks." I wanted a sharper answer. I wanted her to tell me that every Sunday afternoon could be converted into money and placed back in my account. Instead, she told me to preserve records, open an individual account for new earnings, leave joint funds alone, and schedule a full consultation. I spent the afternoon copying delivered Lakeshore files into the shared directory where they belonged. I made a transfer log with dates and file names. The final acceptance speech stayed on my laptop because Evan had never reviewed or received it. So did the unfinished state forum outline. At 4:12, Brooke requested access to my personal cloud folder. I declined the request. At 4:19, she sent it again. I declined again and emailed the transfer log to her, Evan, and the company's general counsel. No one answered that day. Evan slept in the guest room for 3 nights. We communicated about the furnace filter and the mortgage by text while living 20 feet apart. On the 4th morning, he left a hotel key sleeve on the counter. I didn't ask whether he had moved into the hotel or merely wanted me to know he could. I needed work. I assembled a portfolio using pieces I could legally show, an old newspaper profile, 2 magazine essays, a museum brochure, and a speech excerpt with all company details removed. A regional medical network was looking for a contract speechwriter, and I applied before I could talk myself out of it. The communications manager liked the anonymous excerpt. "Do you have anything published under your name from the last 3 years?" she asked during the video interview. "Most recent work was executive ghostwriting." "That's fine. Can your clients confirm?" I had planned for the question. I had not planned for how exposed I would feel answering it. The primary client was my husband's employer. We're in the process of separating, so I would prefer not to involve them. She paused. "Do you have another executive reference?" I began explaining the award nomination. Halfway through, I heard myself describing the seating chart. The manager's expression became professionally kind. "I'm sorry," I said. "That wasn't relevant. It sounds like you're dealing with a lot." I did not get the project. After the call, I deleted my professional biography and immediately restored it from the trash because Elise had told me not to delete records when I was upset. The instruction had been about marital and company evidence, not a bad paragraph about myself, but following it gave me something to do. The next morning, an email arrived from the business council coordinator. I had written only to ask that their attendance records show I had not used the dinner seat assigned to me. She apologized for the confusion and attached the change request. 2 days before the gala, Brooke had written, "Please move me to the recipient guest seat so I can support photography and press. Dana Mills can sit with the Lakeshore party." Evan had replied 11 minutes later, "That's fine. Put Dana with the Lakeshore group. Brooke needs to be beside me for photographs." The coordinator added, "I understood this was agreed among your party. I'm sorry if it was not." I saved the message for Elise. I did not send it to Renee or post it anywhere. For an embarrassing minute, I opened Brooke's public profile and imagined attaching the email beneath her newest photograph. Then I closed the page. Brooke called before lunch. "I was hoping we could speak like adults," she said. I nearly hung up. Curiosity kept me there. "About which part?" "The transition. We need your frameworks and your interview method. Evan says you have templates." "I have questions I ask people. They're not company property." "Dana, no one is trying to steal from you. You put your name on an award application I wrote. I submitted it." Communications submissions use the department owner in the metadata. It was a plausible answer, which made me angrier than a stupid one would have. "Did you know I wrote it?" I asked. "I knew you helped Evan shape his story. Did you know before or after he got you promoted?" She went silent for a beat. "My promotion has nothing to do with you. Was it before or after you started sleeping with him?" "I'm not discussing my private life." "You called my private number." She exhaled. "He told me you two had been living separate lives for years. That was almost funny. We had shared a bathroom that morning." "When did he tell you that?" "This isn't productive." "Probably not. The state forum is in 8 days. If Evan is unprepared, it affects more people than the 3 of us. Then do your job." She hung up first. Renee came over that evening with my coat cleaned and a paper bag of takeout noodles. She did not say she'd always disliked Evan. She had liked him. That made sitting across from her harder. "I have a small job," she said after I told her about the medical network interview. Small means small. $850. Her food bank's annual dinner speaker was a warehouse supervisor named Leonard who hated podiums and had rejected 2 drafts from their marketing volunteer. "I don't want you to give me pity work," I said. "Good, because Leonard will return it if it's bad." He did. My first draft sounded like a person running for governor. I had given him a 3-part structure, a polished opening, and a closing sentence about dignity being delivered 1 box at a time. Leonard read the first page in Renee's office, took off his glasses, and said, "This sounds impressive." "It just doesn't sound like me." I felt heat rise into my face. With Evan, I had known which words he would never say. I had known where he paused, where he joked, which memories he polished until they were no longer true. I had mistaken knowing one man's voice for mastering everyone else's. "You're right," I said. "Can I start over?" Leonard shrugged. "You're the writer." "Not yet, apparently." He smiled a little at that. I interviewed him again. This time I asked what had gone wrong during his first week at the food bank. He told me about a donated delivery van that started only if someone held the battery cable while another person turned the key. He told me night shift volunteers used to pack cans into liquor boxes because those were the only boxes they could get for free. The second draft was shorter. Leonard kept the battery cable and removed my favorite joke. At the dinner, people laughed at his joke instead. Renee paid my invoice 3 days later. She also signed a release allowing me to use 2 paragraphs in my portfolio. The payment did not feel like a victory when it reached my account. $525 went to Elise for the full consultation. Another $100 covered the software subscription I had let expire because I used to work in Evan's shared documents. After groceries and gas, I had less than a day's mortgage payment left from my first real speechwriting job. Still, the invoice said Dana Mills, writer. I printed it, then felt ridiculous and put it through the shredder. The shredder jammed halfway down my name. I spent 10 minutes pulling paper strips out with tweezers. Renee helped me build a plain 1-page website. My first biography called me an award-winning executive communications strategist, which was technically defensible and sounded like Brooke had written it. "What do you actually do?" Renee asked. "I listen until people stop performing, and then I write the part they were trying to say." "Put that." "It sounds small." "You need clients, not a throne." I put a less polished version on the page. Within a week, 3 people used the contact form. One wanted a free sample speech before deciding whether to hire me. One offered exposure at a networking breakfast. The third ran a neighborhood arts council and had $400 for remarks at a grant ceremony. I took the $400. The client changed the event theme after I delivered the first draft. Under the old arrangement, I would have complained to Evan while rewriting it for free. This time I opened the contract, found the revision clause Renee had insisted on, and sent a change estimate. My hand hovered over send for almost a minute. The client approved the extra $100 without arguing. That frightened me in a different way. I had spent years assuming that naming a price would make people leave. Some did leave. Others simply asked when the work would be ready. On the same afternoon, Evan's mother called and said she had heard there had been an embarrassing mix-up at the dinner. It wasn't a mix-up, I said. He shouldn't have moved your seat. He knows that. I waited for the rest. But 16 years is a great deal to throw away over one public event. Ask him what happened in the service hallway. She did not speak for several seconds. Then she said she would call me later. She never did. By then, Lakeshore had hired a Chicago communications agency to finish Evan's state keynote and 2 customer events. The rush estimate was $14,500. I knew because the agency's project manager copied me on a request for historical materials. I sent the approved files already listed in my transfer log. When she asked for a call so I could explain Evan's voice architecture, I replied that I was not under contract and wished them well. Evan came home that night for more clothes. 14.5, he said from the bedroom doorway. That's what this little boundary is costing the company. I was sitting on the floor sorting tax documents into 2 piles. The company has a communications department. The agency has to rebuild everything from scratch because you won't spend 30 minutes on the phone. They have the delivered work. They don't know why it works. Neither does Brooke. He dropped a stack of shirts into his suitcase. You want me to say you were important? Fine. You were important. The past tense landed between us. The mortgage payment is still coming from the joint account, he said. My paycheck will go into my individual account starting Friday. Elise can talk to my attorney about expenses. It was not illegal or even surprising. It still frightened me. My $850 payment looked small beside the utility bills spread across the carpet. I accepted a tedious copy editing job for a school supply catalog and worked until 2 in the morning correcting measurements for dry erase boards. The state forum took place the following Thursday. I watched only the 5-minute clip the organizers posted afterward. Evan was competent. The agency had given him clean sentences and no personal stories he could forget. He sounded like a man who had been professionally prepared by strangers. 2 days later, he arrived at the house carrying a 1-page statement. Lakeshore's HR director had opened a conflict review after employees reported his relationship with Brooke. Because Brooke had been promoted 3 months after the relationship began, the review included her performance claims and the work used in the award submission. The statement said Brooke had led and authored Lakeshore's executive communications for 18 months. My contribution had been limited to occasional proofreading as Evan's spouse. They want context, he said. This gives them context. This gives them a lie. Brooke did lead communications. Then write that. Don't say she wrote my work. He pushed the paper closer. No one is taking anything from you. This keeps the review focused. It protects jobs. I picked up the pen. He watched my hand, the way he had watched it over the contract. Instead of signing, I photographed the page and handed it back. I won't expose your company, I said. I also won't lie for you. His mouth tightened. You'll regret making this bigger. You brought it to my house. He left the pen on the table and took the statement with him. At 9 the next morning, Lakeshore's general counsel emailed me a formal request for a limited fact interview about the authorship of Evan's public materials. Elise told me not to answer until she had read the request. They're not accusing you of anything, she said. That doesn't mean you walk into an internal review and tell your life story. We agreed I would answer questions about documents I had created, dates I could verify, and statements made directly to me. I would not guess why Evan promoted Brooke or what the company's board knew. The interview took place by video the following Tuesday. Lakeshore's general counsel appeared from his office. An outside workplace investigator joined from Chicago. Both were polite in the way people are when they intend to take careful notes. The investigator began with the award nomination. "Who created the earliest draft you have?" she asked. "I did." "At whose request?" "Evan's." "Were you paid by Lakeshore?" "No." "Did Miss Carter direct your work?" "Not on that project." She received the final materials through Evan. I shared my screen and opened the first interview transcript. The timestamp predated the submitted application by 11 months. Then I showed the draft history and Evan's email asking me to make the leadership section less corporate and more like Dad. The investigator asked whether Brooke had contributed anything. I could have said no. It would have felt good for about 5 seconds. "She managed the submission," I said. "She chose photographs, handled the deadline, and coordinated with the business council. I don't know what else she did internally." The general counsel looked up from his notes. "But the narrative draft?" "Mine. We went through 7 speeches. Some were almost entirely my writing. 2 began with Evan's rough drafts. 1 had been substantially reorganized by Brooke's team after I delivered it. I said so. They asked about the acceptance speech in the black folder. Was that company property? It was unfinished work I had not delivered. Evan had a separate outline and all approved historical materials. I did not remove or delete those. Did anyone instruct you to withhold the final? No. Why did you? I could see Elise in the small square at the bottom of the screen. She did not nod or signal. I had just seen Evan kissing Miss Carter. He had moved her into the spouse seat and moved me to another table. When he asked for the folder, I declined to give him work I had completed without a contract or payment. The investigator did not react beyond typing. "When did you first learn there was a relationship?" "That night." Evan later told me it had lasted about 7 months. "Do you know whether the relationship began before Miss Carter's promotion?" "Only from what Evan told me. I don't have independent knowledge." That answer disappointed some part of me. I wanted to hand them a clean timeline with every ugly thing labeled. Instead, I gave them what I could prove. The interview lasted 83 minutes. When it ended, I closed my laptop and discovered I'd been gripping a yellow highlighter hard enough to crack the cap. Elise called immediately. "You did fine." "That's it?" "That's it. Internal reviews move on internal time." I had expected to feel vindicated. Mostly I needed lunch. I drove to the grocery store and bought milk, eggs, coffee, and the wrong kind of trash bags. At home, the 12-gallon bags slid straight into the 16-gallon can. I used one anyway and watched it collapse under a coffee filter. For 3 weeks, I heard nothing from Lakeshore. Evan and I moved through the formal beginning of a separation. He rented a furnished apartment near the highway. I stayed in the house while we obtained an appraisal and exchanged retirement statements. His attorney sent proposals. Elise translated them into ordinary language and circled the places where mutual confidentiality meant more than it appeared to. Brooke's name disappeared from Evan's travel calendar. Her company profile still listed her as communications director, but the reporting line had changed from president to chief administrative officer. I noticed because I looked. I told myself I was checking facts. Sometimes I was only checking whether anything hurt her yet. The answer was not much, at least not where I could see it. My own work grew in inconvenient increments. The Arts Council referred me to a community college dean. Leonard referred me to a union training coordinator who spoke in 6-minute tangents and wanted everyone preserved. I completed 3 speech projects and 2 editing contracts over 2 months. I also missed a deadline. I had saved 2 versions of a foundation speech with nearly identical file names and sent the older one at 11:54 on a Friday night. The client found the missing revisions the next morning. I apologized, delivered the correct file, and reduced my invoice by 20%. For half a day, I was certain the mistake proved Evan had been the only reason my work ever succeeded. Then the client hired me for a smaller follow-up project and asked me to change my file naming system. I did. The first mediation session took place in a beige conference room with a box of tissues placed exactly halfway between us. Evan had lost weight. I knew because the collar of the blue shirt I bought him the previous Christmas sat loose around his neck. The appraisal sat between us beside a mortgage statement and 2 retirement account summaries. Evan wanted to keep the house, but the mediator reminded him that wanting it and qualifying to refinance it were different things. Elise wrote my projected share of the equity in the margin of her legal pad. I copied the number into my notebook, then wrote health insurance beneath it because my coverage would end after the divorce. During a break, Evan followed me to the vending machines. "Are you happy now?" he asked. I pressed B6 for pretzels and got crackers from B7. "About the crackers?" "About the review." I looked at him. "They finished it?" He laughed without humor. "Don't pretend you don't know. They didn't tell me the result." "Written warning," he said. "That's what they gave me." Lakeshore had issued him a written warning for failing to disclose a relationship with a direct report. He had been removed from the Management Compensation Committee for 6 months because he participated in Brooks' promotion recommendation. The company also assigned another executive to serve as primary public spokesperson while Evan completed leadership and conflict of interest training. The warning did not cost him his title or salary. The award stayed on his office shelf. His discretionary bonus was under review, which he described as if I had personally taken it from his account. Brooke had been moved under another executive and placed on a performance plan because she overstated her authorship during the investigation. She resigned 2 months later for a communications job at a smaller company. "You made them think I can't write my own name," Evan said. "I showed them who wrote the documents they asked about." "You could have said it was collaborative." "Some of it was." I said that. "That's not the point." The crackers hung in the machine. I hit the glass with the side of my fist. They dropped. "Yes," I said. "I do." The mediator called us back before he could answer. Evan's next proposal gave me a slightly larger share of the house equity in exchange for a broad non-disparagement and confidentiality clause. It prohibited me from claiming authorship of any communication associated with Evan Mills or Lakeshore Freight Systems. Elise crossed out that sentence. We offered language protecting customer data, private financial information, and internal operational material. We would not agree that saying I wrote a speech was disparagement. Evan leaned toward his attorney. They whispered. Then he looked directly at me. "Why do you need to tell people?" "I need to be able to show what I did when I have permission. I need to answer honestly if I'm asked." No one was asking before this. You were. Every week. That's not what I meant. He pushed his legal pad away. I thought you'd cool down. I thought once Brooke was out of the reporting line, we could at least handle the work like adults. I stared at him. I watched you kiss her, and you still asked me for the folder. His attorney looked down. Elise turned one page of the proposal and waited. Evan rubbed his thumb over the groove where his wedding ring had been. He had stopped wearing it sometime after moving into the apartment. I needed you, he said. I know. The final settlement took another 7 weeks. Evan refinanced the house and paid my share of the equity. We divided the retirement accounts under ordinary marital rules. I rented a 2-bedroom townhouse with an upstairs office that did not share a wall with a dryer. The second bedroom held 3 unopened boxes for almost a month because I had underestimated how exhausting it would be to choose where every object belonged. In the townhouse, I checked my business account before I brushed my teeth and again after breakfast. The first health insurance premium made me swear out loud at my kitchen counter. I took one client whose calls I dreaded because the money was good and ended the contract only after he asked for a 4th unpaid revision. Then, on a Tuesday in October, Evan emailed me a script for Lakeshore's anniversary video. Can you just look at the ending? 10 minutes. It doesn't sound right. I opened the document automatically. The closing paragraph had 3 abstract nouns in the first sentence and used community 4 times. I changed one verb. Then another. By the time I reached the last line, I had written 86 words in the margin. My body knew the job before my mind caught up. I selected every comment and deleted it. Then I replied with the contact information for the agency Lakeshore had hired after the awards dinner. They know your company voice, I wrote. He answered 11 minutes later. Forget it. I closed the message and returned to the speech due on my own desk. Renee had forwarded a public request for proposals from the Community Medical Foundation. I submitted the old newspaper profile, Leonard's approved excerpt, the Arts Council remarks, and a short explanation of my process. The foundation interviewed 3 writers. Its executive director joined our call 4 minutes late with reading glasses pushed into her hair and a paper lunch bag open beside her keyboard. She had been an emergency room nurse for 22 years and had no patience for inflated language. Your website says you help people sound like themselves, she said. Everybody says that. Most people do sound like themselves until a microphone is involved. And then they start using words like transformational. She smiled despite trying not to. I hate that word. She asked why so little of my recent work carried my name. I had prepared a careful answer about confidential executive communications. It sounded evasive even to me. I spent years writing for my husband without a contract, I said instead. I can't use most of that work. The pieces in front of you are the ones I have permission to show. Would you do that again? Work without clear terms? Write for somebody powerful and disappear. The question made me uncomfortable because the honest answer was not a polished no. Money could make disappearing look practical. So could praise. I know what the contract needs to say now, I told her. The foundation hired me for $2,400, half paid up front. When I sent the agreement, I almost reduced the amount before she saw it. She signed without negotiating. The work took 5 weeks. I interviewed her, the transportation coordinator, 2 clinic managers, and a volunteer driver. A staff member suggested a dramatic patient story involving a missed cancer appointment. When I asked whether the patient had consented to public use, nobody could find a release. We left it out. The story we used was smaller. A man recovering from a broken hip lived beyond the last bus stop and had postponed 2 follow-up appointments. The volunteer driver remembered that he always waited outside 15 minutes early, even in rain, because he worried the car would leave without him. My first draft opened with the executive director's childhood in a rural county. She crossed out the entire page. "Nobody wants to hear about my childhood while they're eating chicken," she said. I laughed, then stopped when I realized she was serious. We opened with the man waiting in the rain. The foundation requested 2 rounds of revisions and paid for a 3rd after its board changed the fundraising target. The final invoice went out with my name, the scope, and the extra work on separate lines. The payment reached my account 2 days before the event. The event coordinator sent me the printed program proof that afternoon. Near the bottom of the staff page, beneath the foundation employees, it listed communications consultant, Dana Mills. My first impulse was to tell her to remove it. Speechwriters were not usually named, and I worried that asking for credit would make me look difficult. Before I could reply, the executive director called. "They spelled Mills right, didn't they?" she asked. "Yes." "Good. I told them to include you." There was no ceremony around it. She moved on to a question about the fundraising total while I kept the proof open on my screen. 6 months after the awards dinner, I stood backstage at the foundation's annual fundraiser. Through the curtain, I could hear forks touching plates and a server asking which table still needed coffee. The final pages were inside the same black folder I had carried to Evan's dinner. I had considered buying a new one. Instead, I wiped a streak of ink from the cover and kept using it. A faint crescent scratch remained near the clasp from where it had struck the registration table. The executive director paced behind the curtain, reading her note cards under her breath. "Does it still sound like me?" she asked. "Especially the part about the chicken." She snorted, opened the folder, and lifted out the pages. "You saved the last page, right? There's a copy on the podium and one with the stage manager." "Good. I lose paper when I'm nervous." She handed the empty folder back and carried the pages toward the curtain. The event coordinator appeared with a headset crooked over one ear. "Dana? We have you up front with the communications group." For a second, I thought she had confused me with someone else. She led me through a side entrance while the lights dimmed. At the first table, between the foundation's grant manager and the local clinic director, a cream card stood beside an empty chair. Dana Mills, communications consultant. The grant manager moved her purse so I could sit. At the next table, a man was arguing softly with a server because his meal contained mushrooms. Nobody looked at me. Nobody knew what another seating card had meant 6 months earlier. The executive director walked to the podium carrying the speech pages. She adjusted the microphone, found the first one, and began in her own voice. I set the empty black folder beneath my chair and left my name card exactly where it was.